Hollywood loves to sell toughness, but some actors didn't need scripts to prove it. These men walked into sets carrying scars, medals, and memories no stunt double could fake. They fought wars, survived crashes, brawled in alleys, and pushed their bodies past breaking. What you saw on screen wasn't performance, it was a survival replay. Today, by the end, you'll know who was acting and who was simply living. John Wayne.
Right, John, you're doing just what they want you to do.
And what would you two want me to do?
Before the cowboy hats, before the iconic drawl, Wayne came from hard beginnings. Born into rural America in the early 20th century, he knew work before he knew comfort. He pushed himself through college on pure strength, earning a football scholarship at USC. Nothing about his path was privileged. It was built on grit. When he first stepped into Hollywood, there was no glamour waiting for him. He wasn't treated like a star. Instead, he hauled props, built sets, and took on the kind of heavy lifting no one else wanted to do. That toughness stuck with him when the cameras finally turned his way.
Right will prevail, John. I know it will.
Yes, Henry, right will prevail. But I guess we'll try your way first.
His pain tolerance became the stuff of legend. During the Alamo, he cracked multiple ribs performing a horse stunt. Most actors would have shut down production. Wayne just wrapped his torso, swallowed painkillers, and kept going. He never complained. He just worked. The real test came in 1964. Doctors cut out one of his lungs and 4 ribs after diagnosing him with cancer. For most men, that would have been the end of a career. For Wayne, it wasn't even a pause. Months later, he was back on set filming The Sons of Katie Elder, still doing his own stunts, like nothing had happened.
What are you gonna do?
What I'd have done 25 years ago. Trace, you round up everybody that can ride a horse or pull a trigger. Let's break out some windshield.
But one of the darkest chapters of his story came with The Conqueror. That film was shot downwind of a nuclear test site in Utah. Radiation filled the area, and nearly half of the 220 people involved in the production later developed cancer. Wayne was one of them. He eventually died from stomach cancer, a disease many believe was caused by that exposure. Yet even as the illness advanced, he never slowed down, never asked for pity, never stepped back from the work. When director Henry Hathaway suggested a stunt double after his surgery, Wayne's reply was blunt. Either I do my own stunts, or you get someone else. That wasn't a line from a script. That was John Wayne in real life. Charlton Heston. Long before he was Moses raising stone tablets or Ben-Hur driving chariots, he was serving in World War II. As a radio operator and aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces, he wasn't on the front lines, but the discipline and toughness of military life shaped him forever. That sense of duty and resilience followed him into Hollywood.
Bring my people out of Egypt.
That you should send me. How can I lead this people out of bondage?
Where he refused shortcuts that most actors would have gladly taken. What separated Heston wasn't just his towering build or commanding voice, it was his refusal to ask for special treatment. On the 10 Commandments, when he carried the heavy stone tablets scene after scene, those weren't fake props. They were real, and the weight tore at his shoulders and back. He never once asked for lighter versions. He wanted the struggle to be real, even if it meant pain. During the greatest story ever told, he ripped ligaments in his shoulder performing a stunt. Instead of stopping production, he had the injury wrapped during lunch and was back on set that same afternoon. That kind of grit defined him.
I am Moses, son of Amram and Yoshabel. Health, prosperity, life to you, Jethro of Midian.
He simply would not let pain or weakness interfere with the work. But his toughest challenge came years later. Like John Wayne and Charles Bronson, Heston worked on The Conqueror, filmed downwind of nuclear testing grounds in Utah. Nearly half of the cast and crew would later be diagnosed with cancer, and Heston was among them. Doctors removed a lung, yet he refused to slow down. He kept acting, even in roles that demanded grueling physical effort.
He is driven forward, always forward.
Roles that would have been punishing for men half his age in perfect health. What kept him going wasn't ego or vanity. It was duty to the production, to the audience, and maybe even to the men he once served with in uniform. That soldier's mindset never left him. James Stewart. James Stewart never bragged about being a war hero, but few Hollywood stars ever lived through what he did.
Indian fire is too big. Come on, pour it on.
Before he was George Bailey, or any of the roles that made him America's everyman, Stewart was a bomber pilot flying B-24 Liberators over Nazi Germany. He didn't just fly, he led. More than 20 missions through flak-filled skies, engines groaning, shells exploding around him. Fear was always there, but he carried it quietly, the way only a true leader can.
Now turn around, get out of here. Get back to warmer air.
When the war ended, Stewart could have spent the rest of his life being introduced as a decorated veteran. Instead, he went back to work like any other actor. No red carpet shortcuts. In It's a Wonderful Life, you can feel that weight in him. The trembling voice, the quiet despair of George Bailey. That wasn't performance alone. It was a man who had seen too much, survived too much, and was pulling real memories into the frame.
I sent in the first wave light, so to draw the fire, and I sent in a heavy second wave before the customer had a chance to reload.
Stewart never faked his roles. In Strategic Air Command, at 47 years old, he crammed himself into the cockpit of a real B-36 bomber to make sure the flying looked authentic. The G-forces churned his stomach just like they had in 1994, but he wouldn't settle for pretending. Audiences could tell it wasn't Hollywood polish, it was a lived experience. The studios of his day had their own hidden dangers. Radiation exposure from shoots near test sites, chemical-laced sets. Many actors from that era paid the price, Stewart included. Cancer followed him later in life, but even then, he didn't stop. In Anatomy of a Murder, his cracking, fiery voice carried the weight of a man who'd fought battles both seen and unseen. Robert Mitchum. At 16, Robert Mitchum was locked up in a Georgia chain gang. Before that, he'd already been hopping freight trains during the Great Depression, drifting from town to town with nothing but his fists and willpower to survive. Sometimes he boxed under fake names just to get a meal. The sleepy-eyed look that later became his trademark? It wasn't an act. It was the face of someone who had already seen too much. His scarred face, his crooked nose, those weren't studio tricks. They were real. Long before the cameras rolled, Mitchum had worked some of the hardest jobs a man could take. He dug ditches, shoveled coal, and grabbed any brutal work that could keep him alive. He wasn't out chasing adventure like some restless teenager. He was just trying to stay afloat in a country where millions were barely scraping by. By the time Hollywood noticed him, Mitchum had already lived more life than most men twice his age. But his rough past didn't just fade away when fame arrived. In 1948, he was arrested for marijuana possession. For most actors, that kind of scandal would have ended everything. Not Mitchum. He shrugged it off, did his 60 days in jail, and walked back into Hollywood bigger than before. He never apologized, never begged forgiveness. He just lit another cigarette, showed up on set, and kept working.
Why didn't you take the AAA detective agency or any one of the couple of dozen that come before my name?
That refusal to care only made him more magnetic. On screen, Mitchum gave off a dangerous calm. He didn't shout or strut. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than most men's anger. Co-stars often said there was something unsettling about him, not because he was intimidating in the usual sense, but because you knew he didn't have to pretend. He had lived through real fights, real danger, and he carried that weight quietly. When asked about his acting style, Mitchum delivered one of his most famous lines. "I have two styles, with and without a horse." That summed him up perfectly. He wasn't performing. He was just being himself. Director Edward Dmytryk even admitted, "You didn't direct Mitchum. You just kept the camera rolling and hoped he didn't knock someone out." Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood never had the look of someone born for Hollywood. Tall, wiry, and quiet, he was the logger's son who seemed more at home with an axe than a camera. But toughness was stamped into him early. Drafted during the Korean War, he wasn't shooting rifles. He was teaching soldiers how to swim against waves that could drown the unprepared. That grit, that focus, never left him. When he stepped onto a film set, Eastwood didn't play cowboys and drifters because they were glamorous. He played them because he understood survival.
Joe, you shouldn't have done that.
Next time, I'll knock your damn head off.
On the good, the bad, and the ugly, the Spanish desert scorched the cast and crew. Dust storms stung the skin, ponchos stuck with sweat, and the sun baked everything in sight. Eastwood didn't ask for comfort. He squinted through the heat, letting the misery carve itself into his performance. That same steel carried into his later years. At 60, shooting Unforgiven, he wrestled with horses and hit the dirt hard enough to split his lip. He refused doubles, even when the risk was obvious. For him, pain wasn't something to avoid. It was something that made the story real. Studios tried to steer him toward lighter films, but Eastwood pushed back. He wanted stories with weight. Directing Mystic River and $1 Million Baby, he showed Hollywood that grit and heartbreak could pack more punch than explosions.
You mean boxing? No, I'll never quit. I like the stink too much, I guess.
His films were about choices, consequences, and the kind of scars you can't see. There were whispers about cancer, the kind that haunted many who filmed near nuclear test sites in the 1960s. Eastwood didn't dwell on rumors or what-ifs. He simply kept going. Into his 80s, he was still behind the camera, steering American Sniper with the same steady hand he once used to guide soldiers through rough water. Now, in his 90s, Eastwood is still on set, lean and weathered, framing shots with eyes that have never lost their sharpness. He isn't chasing trophies or applause. He works because the work itself matters to him. Charles Bronson. Long before Hollywood cameras pointed his way, he was a child in the coal mines of Pennsylvania, working underground at just 10 years old. One of 15 children, his family lived in crushing poverty. While other kids were in schoolyards, Bronson was hundreds of feet below the earth, covered in soot, breaking his back to help feed his family. That coal dust didn't just harden his body, it carved his spirit into something unshakable. Then came World War II. Bronson traded one dangerous world for another. He became a tail gunner on a B-29 bomber, flying missions over Japan, where survival rates were slim. Sitting in the back of that plane, he stared down enemy fire, and when shrapnel finally found him, he walked away with a Purple Heart. After the war, he didn't return to comfort. There wasn't any. He picked onions in the fields, flipped burgers in greasy diners, even tried his hand at boxing just to scrape by. Survival was always the point. When acting came his way, Bronson didn't see it as a dream. It was a paycheck. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing rent. But directors and audiences quickly realized this man wasn't acting. His quiet, his stare, the way his fists landed on screen, it all rang true because it was true. He didn't need to pretend. His whole life had been training for it. Actor John Michael Vincent, who worked with him on The Mechanic.
Point the gun as though it were an extension of your arm, and keep both eyes open.
Once said that Bronson grabbed his shirt in a scene, and the strength shocked him. He wasn't faking it. That power was real. And when death threats came from the mafia after his role in Death Wish, the studio offered him bodyguards. Bronson brushed them off. He'd already stared down war, poverty, and death. Christopher Walken. Not all tough guys need to be war heroes or gangsters. Before Christopher got his strange roles, the haunted eyes, and the unforgettable voice, he was a dancer. A kid from Queens who learned rhythm before dialogue, timing before fame. That dancer's instinct never left him, and it shaped everything he became on screen. He wasn't the classic leading man. Too wiry, too unusual, too unpredictable, but that's what made him magnetic. In The Deer Hunter, he didn't just play a prisoner of war, he lived it. He dropped weight until his ribs pressed through his skin. He kept himself awake to let fear crawl under his eyes. And when that Russian roulette gun clicked empty, it was his nerves, not the script, that made the moment unforgettable. Walken didn't baby himself on set. In King of New York, a brutal fight scene left him with a twisted knee. He didn't complain. He taped it, limped through grimy alleys, and turned the pain into part of the performance. That was his secret. He used what others would hide. Comfort never interested him. On Sleepy Hollow, filming in England's freezing fog, he rode through mud with his hands so numb he could barely hold the reins. Yet he never broke focus. The pain, the cold, it all fed into the scene. Walken understood that the best performances weren't clean. They were raw, a little broken, and completely real. The industry wasn't always kind. The 70s were full of toxic sets, heavy with smoke, chemicals, and asbestos. Cancer rumors followed, the price of an era that didn't think about safety. Walken never made a spectacle of it. He just kept showing up the same way he always had. Even age didn't slow him. At 70, while most actors leaned on nostalgia, Walken was tap dancing across the stage in Jersey Boys, his steps sharp, his rhythm unshaken. He wasn't trying to prove he still had it. He was showing that he'd never lost it. Jack Palance. Most actors hide their scars. Jack Palance built a career on his. One fiery crash in World War II turned his face into a map of jagged lines, and instead of covering them, he wore them like armor. Those scars didn't make him less. They made him unforgettable. When he walked into a frame, audiences didn't see Hollywood polish. They saw a man who had already lived through fire. Before the cameras, Palance had fought in the boxing ring, trading punches for pay. Then came the war, where he flew B-24 bombers until one went down in flames and nearly took him with it. Survival gave him a new look, but also a new strength. He wasn't meant to play polished heroes. He was built for roles that demanded danger.
It certainly isn't an ordinary fuse.
You're getting...
On Shane, he became the Killer Wilson, his eyes cold enough to stop a heartbeat. When a stunt went wrong and cracked his collarbone, he didn't step aside. He gritted his teeth, reset the scene, and climbed back in the saddle. No stand-ins, no complaints. Palance believed pain was part of the job. That attitude carried into Attack, where he crawled through mud and endured real bruises for scenes that looked more like combat than cinema. Later, while shooting Dracula in Romania, freezing nights left the crew dragging their feet. Palance, already in his 50s, grabbed lights and hauled equipment himself, his breath rising in the cold. He didn't care about the image. He cared about getting it right. Hollywood carried its own hidden dangers. Many shoots in the desert during the 1950s exposed crews to nuclear test fallout. Decades later, cancer claimed many of them. Palance was no exception, but he never turned his illness into headlines.
The producers say, they talk about you and they say, well, what do you think? Can we risk it? Can we do it? Can we use him? The other guy says, I don't know, let's look at some younger ones.
He kept working, his gravelly voice still biting through roles in Young Guns and Batman. Even in his 70s, he refused to act his age. On the set of City Slickers, he dropped to the floor and cranked out one-armed push-ups, daring anyone to keep up. Audie Murphy. If toughness had a disguise, it would look like Audie Murphy. Not towering, not scared, not intimidating, just a boyish face, soft voice, and a frame so small most people wouldn't give him a second look. He stood only 5 feet 5 inches and weighed 112 pounds when he enlisted. Yet, behind that gentle appearance was the most decorated American combat soldier in history. A man who did the impossible again and again. By the age of 19, Murphy had already carved his name into military legend.
What are you trying to do? Win yourself a wooden cross or something?
I thought I told you to get on down the hill.
In one of his most famous actions, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, held off an entire company of German soldiers for over an hour, and then, wounded and nearly out of ammunition, led a counterattack that drove them back. That single act earned him the Medal of Honor. But it wasn't his only moment of bravery. By his 21st birthday, he had earned every American medal for valor that could be awarded. 28 decorations in total. Military historians estimate he personally killed over 240 enemy soldiers. The numbers sound unbelievable. And when Hollywood later told his story in To Hell and Back, based on his own memoir, the producers actually cut down his achievements. They worried audiences wouldn't believe the truth. It seemed too heroic, too much like fiction. When Murphy arrived in Hollywood after appearing on the cover of Life magazine, security guards at studios didn't even believe he was the real Audie Murphy. How could this soft-spoken young man be the soldier who stormed machine gun nests, destroyed tanks, and survived wounds most men would never walk away from? That disconnect between his quiet presence and deadly skill was what made him so unforgettable. But the war never left him. Behind his calm smile, Murphy carried deep scars. He battled severe PTSD long before the term was widely understood. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow and woke from nightmares in violent flashbacks. His wife once admitted, during those episodes, "It wasn't Audie anymore. It was someone I didn't recognize." Even in civilian life, people could sense the edge beneath his surface. In one argument with a businessman, witnesses watched Murphy change instantly.
All the talks you and I have had about it, I've decided to go in for service.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Controlled, dangerous, and terrifying. The man backed down, later admitting, "I realized in that moment he could kill me without hesitation." Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman's career started with a lie. At just 16, he shaved a few years off his age to enlist in the Marines, desperate to get out and prove himself. That bold move landed him in China, where he learned two things that stayed with him for life: how to take orders and how to break them when it mattered. That balance, duty, and defiance became the fuel behind every role he ever played.
Without authentication is no order at all. That's our #1 rule. That rule is the basis for the scenario we've...
Hackman wasn't Hollywood's idea of a star. He didn't have matinee idol looks or a smooth, charming voice. He had grit, rough edges, and a stare that cut deeper than any line of dialogue. Casting agents doubted him, but when the cameras rolled, he turned doubt into silence. In The French Connection, when he bolted through Brooklyn chasing down a train, he wasn't acting polished or careful. He was pounding pavement on bad legs, lungs burning, plowing through real crowds who weren't even extras. That chaos? It was as real as it looked, and Hackman thrived in it. By the time Crimson Tide came around, Hackman was in his 60s, carrying a back that ached with every movement. But on that submarine set, sweating under the lights, he barked orders like a man half his age, never letting pain show. He didn't complain. He didn't want it easy. He wanted the truth on film. The truth, though, came with a cost. The toxic haze of mid-century film sets and long days shooting near desert nuclear test sites left many actors battling cancer, Hackman included. Add in heart scares, and it would have been easy to step back, fade into retirement. But Hackman never let illness define him. He simply shifted gears. When he left acting, he didn't chase applause or try to stage a comeback. Instead, he turned to writing. His novels carried the same grit as his performances. Stories with hard edges, built on tension and honesty. Even into his 80s, Hackman was seen jogging, his marine posture still upright, still unbroken. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.